What we see is unique in ISIS's case is I think they're using a cool factor in their approach. They're very strategic in how they approach and who they approach. They're using online social mediums, places and mediums that are virtually unsupervised, at times where people are vulnerable to such ideals. I think where I'm talking about the cool factor here is putting aside that they're American Muslims, they're teenage girls, and they're trying to go about their day-to-day lifestyles, combining their American identity and Muslim identity. They're eating sandwiches, they're going to school every day, make good grades, and then on top of that trying to blend those Muslim Islamic principles. So I think when ISIS presents like this, if you join us, we'll find you a way over there, and we guarantee you a spot in Jannah, like, hey, I got my life together. That's it. That's all I got to do. You know, one quick ticket over it.
So yeah, it is a threat. I mean, if anybody is going to say it is, if anybody argues that it's not a threat, you're closing your eyes and ignoring the problem, because we need to neutralize it before it is a problem.
People may be influenced by these ideas and may not feel comfortable coming to talk to you about certain concerns that they have. There are very legitimate concerns within the Muslim community domestically and internationally about American foreign policy. That's not really talked about a lot in certain levels, and people don't feel they have the avenues to speak about those things. Let's not really worry about projecting so much to the non-Muslims when we don't even know who we are. What is our position on gay people in our community? Do we have an official position on that? The Christian community dealt with it 20 years ago. They talked about welcoming but not affirming. You don't find an answer from our community on that issue. What is our position, for example, on patriarchy in the tradition? What's our position on slavery that existed in some of our sacred texts? I'm not trying to challenge you to deny or affirm. I'm saying, do we have a collective position on issues? ISIS comes and says it's a binary world. It's kufr and iman. And that's it. It's a very simplistic way of looking at life. I would say that ISIS has answered questions that I don't think Sunday school provides answers for. The racial problem in the American Muslim community is an explicit problem. Look at ISIS. What do they tell young women? You can marry whoever you want. Whereas in America, as a free citizen, many of you know that if you went home to Baba and said, Baba, I found a fine white boy, you probably wouldn't say it that way, or African American, or the guy who's not from our village, it's at least a 3-year coalition building, lobbying struggle. No, let's be honest. So ISIS comes and says, come here, we got ripped warriors. No, really. It's a very simplistic response, but it's somewhat effective.
The problem, and one of the reasons why this narrative is being perpetuated, is I don't think we have enough seats at the table. I don't think we have enough, Muslim journalists, correspondents to be able to speak out against these things and to even just respond to them. And so when you don't have a seat at the table, it's easier for people to neglect your viewpoint, to neglect your perspective, and maybe skew it in one way or another. I think our response, too, is maybe in some ways, I think, more muted than it needs to be during this time. And I think this was really underscored to me. I was listening to a radio broadcast right when ISIS, first started earlier this summer. One of the correspondents asked, well, why don't we hear the Muslim voice? Why aren't Muslims speaking out against this? The person being interviewed, Reza Aslan, and he basically said, well, what more do you want? All of our Muslim organizations have put out statements condemning this. I think this instance really underscores the fact that maybe we're not doing enough. We need to take it a step further and kind of get on the same playing field and compete with them in that way to make sure that our voices are heard in the way that we want them to be heard, and that the stories are told in the way that takes into account our perspective.
When you pay a media consultant, you buy access. We tend to think that we can do it on our own because we're so special or whatever. When there's a story, people will show up. It's like a personal trainer. You know, when you work out, you go to the gym for like years and nothing changes. And you just get mad at yourself. And then finally you pay for a personal trainer, or you join your Zumba class or whatever, and then you're like, oh wow, I can see like an ab, right? That's what really we need to start considering, that most 501c3s, the way that they're ran in the Muslim community creates a acute sense of apathy amongst us. We're not donors. We have disposable wealth. Instead of call of duty, we need to answer the call to this duty. We don't invigorate young people and people, older people who could donate. And one of the things that we really should be considering are hiring Olivia Pope. I'm serious. I reached out to the real Olivia Pope about something. That when Fox News was, coming at me hard, we don't think that way right now. And until we start thinking that way, we are going to have we need to hire the personal trainer.
In the larger context, I don't believe that Muslims do not have the responsibility to consistently condemn or have to voice that this is not us. Necessarily our responsibility. It was not our issues that was created. However, there is a difference in terms of condemning and clarifying and speaking out against such actions. Whether it was ISIS or any other body of faith, any injustices like that should be spoken out against too.
During no part of that process should we be apologizing. We don't have to say sorry for things that we had no influence over. We don't have to say sorry for what they're doing because we didn't have any influence over what they're doing. But we do need to condemn them. It doesn't matter what they're saying because just as Muslims, we have to condemn what they're doing. People say that, oh, they're not us, they're not our problem, they have nothing to do with us, so leave us alone. I think that's so simplistic and naive to a certain extent because as Muslims, we're supposed to right wrongs and we're supposed to speak out against things that are wrong. And when ISIS is beheading innocent people, when when there's indiscriminate violence and torture and forceful conversions, we have to speak out against that. They're saying that they're Muslim and you're being associated with them just because you also identify as a Muslim. They're wearing a mask with your face on it, going around in the street and chopping people's heads off. Is that not your problem? I think it is our problem, and they have everything to do with us. Just as Muslims, forgetting what other people are saying, I think it's definitely a necessity for us to condemn them and to speak out against them.
Condemning takes many forms, and it's all about how you condemn. So just by being a good person myself, by embodying the principles of Islam, by making sure that my neighbors feel comfortable enough to come to me and ask me questions. I think those are steps that we need to take as well. So it's not just on the media's front, but also in our personal interactions. As I mentioned earlier, we all have the responsibility, I believe, as being ambassadors for Islam, and that's not something we necessarily asked for, but these are the times, and we have to do what we can to ameliorate the circumstances as best as we can. And one of those ways is showing people that, look, we're open, and providing an alternative narrative than the one that the media presents. Just making that effort in your own circle and the people around you. Getting involved in the PTA. How many Muslim moms do we have on the PTA? Alhamdulillah, when my mom was on the PTA, she was one of the only ones. Hosting community barbecues, those kinds of things, and establishing, as you mentioned with the media, establishing a rapport, but that extends beyond the media and just within people, in the community, so that when people see these things on the news, they also can put two and two together and say, oh, we understand that this is not you, that we don't associate this with you. And that's something that I really appreciated actually after September 11th. I had a number of neighbors that came up to me and actually they called us. They called my family and said, I'm so sorry for what's happening. Non-Muslims calling us to apologize for the acts of Muslims. To say, I'm so sorry for what's happening. I'm so sorry that you're going through this. We know that this is not you. Just establishing those relationships is important. And it's nothing outside of our deen. Practicing good Islamic character is nothing outside of our deen. I think it's important to take that extra step if we need to be able to establish those relationships and connections and develop a rapport.
Most people who have this view of Muslims as violent people probably haven't gotten to know a Muslim. What Sada is saying about getting involved in the local community establishments like the PTA or even local government, that really influences people's view of Islam. They see that we're human beings, we're just a different kind of American.
Well, first of all, they're engaged in interpretation of doctrine. That's a very different discussion. So the response would be, first of all, let's identify the doctrines that you are referencing. For example, Sam Harris says in his book that on every page of the Quran there's a verse that encourages believers to kill non-believers. How many of you are Muslims? Is that on every page of the Quran? No. Who's actually on the front lines fighting ISIS? Who? Are Muslims. They've lost a large number of people even women from the Kurds, may Allah preserve them, are fighting ISIS. So this idea that, the Muslims aren't responding, well, the Muslims are actually on the front lines of this battle. Fighting for, and these are people who, obviously are adherent, non-adherent, whatever, but they're fighting the struggle. So I would say, so then what doctrine are they holding on to? And what doctrine is encouraging them to fight? And then what doctrine we have the majority of theologians, activists, the larger community, what doctrine are they holding on to? I think that would also be a helpful discussion to have.
They exist, but it's a two-step process. They make a step towards us, and we need to take a step towards them.
I would add something, if you don't mind. You ask her, does she trust her leaders? I think we have a top-down problem in our community. I would ask leaders, do you trust your communities? That's a question that's never asked. Most of them love their communities, but don't feel that if a board steps in to kick them out, there will be a revolution like you saw in Egypt, no matter how great the imam is. So I would say, and this contributes to the problem, where you may have leaders in Muslim communities who want to go full throttle, want to really open up institutions in a way that are going to transform it, be transformative, but they realize that the community won't really get their back when all is said and done. They're avatars. People love them, they clap for them, they sing for them, they dance for them, they get the Holy Ghost, they speak in tongues. When their job security is threatened, or when they're put in positions where they have families, I'll be honest with you, many imams I know, most of the American convert imams lost their jobs because they were too liberal, they were seen as being a little bit too progressive. I know that's a loaded term. And then boards would have private meetings, and they would be axed, and the community would cry, and this didn't happen to me in Boston. Boston was incredible. Cry, bring baklava, and condemn, but not apologize. And then they would be out of a job. So I think sometimes we constantly blame Muslim leaders, where Muslim leaders, my conversations with many of them, is they feel that you as the masses, and I'm not saying this to make you feel bad, are not going to go bail them out of jail. You'll clap and cry or condemn when they make mistakes. I will do the same. But then when the stuff hits the fan, go and fight, we'll watch. And again, I think even the question is rooted in this idea of we have the Mahdi syndrome, whereas the leaders can only do so much. And you're seeing a pattern now, right? Great, brilliant imams, Nu'man Ali Khan, Umar Suleiman, Sheikh Hamza, Dr. Omar, where do they work? Dr. Sherman, where do they work? In institutions or independent? They're independent. Because the institutional life of an imam is like a professional athlete. It's basically like a professional tailback in NFL. 3 to 4 years, major injury, and you're out. So I think that's another piece to this. Effective leadership will be supported by effective followers. They have supporters. They don't have family. Jay Electronica said, you got fans, I got fam. Most imams might say, I have fans, but I don't have fam.
Some people say that ISIS is doing something rather than nothing, and that they should be given props for that.
Yeah, there's a sense that what ISIS is doing is justified because they have real political goals. They're trying to supposedly rectify all the wrongs that were committed in the Middle East against Arabs and Muslims and all the other ethnic groups and religious groups. It's definitely a legitimate concern for Muslims in the West. It's legitimate to feel some resentment against Western governments for some of the hardships that Muslims have faced. That doesn't mean we should point to them and attack them viciously or even say that you guys need to rectify this. I would tell ISIS not like this, not through beheading innocent civilians and making a spectacle out of it, not by forceful conversions. If you've watched documentaries about ISIS, there's a really good one by Vice News, you can see that they've taken churches and converted them into Islamic education centers. That doesn't sound so bad when you put it that way, but that literally means it's a propaganda center. Where is la ikraha fi din in that? Where is no compulsion? There is no compulsion in religion in that. That's not a part of Islam. forcefully converting people. Even if they say that they're doing all of this to rectify the wrongs, that's not solving anything. That's creating more problems.
Self-assessment is important in that respect. I think it's important also to be able to understand where we are, where we're going, where we need to go, as opposed to just rash actions. Just because, as you mentioned, it is a sexy topic, there is a hype, etc. But really getting to the crux of the problem. I'm not joining the PTA just because I want people to see me with hijab on the PTA. I'm joining the PTA to make an impact in my child's school. I'm involved in my community to better my community, to implement positive change and that kind of thing. Let's focus on doing what we need to do, what we know is right, and once you do that, I think it radiates. Positivity just spurs after that.
The reality is that we live in a hyper centralized culture and media when it comes to Islam, Muslims, US foreign policy. So much of the conversation is in sound bites. And the goal for tonight was to bring together individuals who the conversation is about. As Imam Suhaib Webb pointed out, many times the conversation is about young people. The media, if you turn on Fox News or CNN or even NPR and some of the more balanced conversations, you see a focused conversation around young people. But what we wanted to do was expand that and bring young people to actually have that conversation, to address this issue. And there can be various opinions, points of views, but it was about having that conversation in a safe space, in a place where there is no pressure on an individual to say certain things or to hold certain opinions. There's a narrative, as the gentleman in the back said, that ISIS points to, and the supporters of ISIS point to, that ISIS is doing something. What are you doing? What are you guys doing? They're actually working towards building, establishing. And that's the narrative that ISIS uses on social media. The narrative is, we're building a state. We're building a place for you to come to and address the grievances that you have, which is not the reality. ISIS is not building anything. ISIS is not building a state. ISIS is actually destroying communities, destroying countries, destroying the lives of individuals, destroying civilizations and heritage of communities who've lived there for millennia. The Yazidis have lived in that region for hundreds of years. Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, have lived in that region for hundreds of years. To come and disrupt that with violence, with forced conversions, with slavery, that is not building anything. That is actually destroying heritage. That is destroying a civilization, and that is destroying cultures. And so they may think, ISIS may think, that a simple narrative that we are doing something and that you're not will be bought by people. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And we see that by the number of young American Muslims, or American Muslims as they say, that want to join ISIS. The numbers are in the dozens. That narrative doesn't stick in the American Muslim community. That narrative is not something that American Muslims are attaching themselves to. And I think it's important, as Saif said in the beginning, to put the threat into perspective so that you can actually diagnose the threat. It's an extremely small number of individuals who are convinced by that narrative. But the reason we're addressing it is because it has an impact on your life. You're here because the conversation is important. You're here because the conversation is impacting you one way or the other. I have a 12-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter who go to school. The conversation about ISIS takes place in their classrooms. My son recently got back from Umrah from Saudi Arabia. His friend asked him, which terrorist training camp did you attend while on your trip? These conversations are real. It's not about apologizing. It's not even about condemning. It's about engaging these conversations. It's actually a duty in the Quran where God says, the best of you are those who call to God. And part of that calling is to clarify who God is for us, what God means for us, and what our faith means in our lives.
The rhetoric from groups like ISIS can sometimes be very, very effective because they do, on the surface, look like very credible. They're doing things and we're not doing anything. As a matter of fact, sometimes when you don't do anything at all, that's better than doing something. They say, no, ibadah. When an oppressor is sleeping, it's an act of worship because people are safe from them, at least for that duration of that time. So for them to disarm and disappear will be the best service they can do for the Ummah and for humanity. At Make Space, we are trying to do that and empower our youth and continue these kinds of conversations. And I am a recovering father myself, so I cannot really, I can disguise it very well, I think, but we needed someone much more better, much more superior in his knowledge and his speaking American. And so we brought Imam Suhaib on board, because I cannot give khutbahs on Breaking Bad or Walking Dead. He's going to do that on a constant basis, inshallah, when he's here in January. So we're really looking forward to him joining our community here. So keep us in your prayers. Thank you so much.
So we thank you for joining us, and this will be part of a series of conversations that we'll continue to have, both physical spaces like these, safe spaces, and online safe spaces as well. And we hope that you continue to engage, and this is part of a call to you, that as individuals you can engage, as institutions we will continue to engage, and if there are any concerns that you have, please come to us and do let us know.
You three are very brilliant. It's wonderful to be here with you both. All three of you, sorry. Aisha and Sarah and Zaid and my brother here with those killer socks. I like the socks. I'm making like so much nazar on your socks. But I'm making hasad on the socks, which means envy. But